Hey everybody, my name is Matt Hanzly. I'm going to be kind of walking you through unboxing your render. Just going to go over some of the renderings I do for packaging and how I do them. I'm a package designer. I got my career started in the toy industry, but for the last 8 years, I've been working mostly doing consumer electronics. As a package designer, I take the package from like initial sketches and research, and I go all the way through to production. I've been using KeyShot for the last 8 years and use it most often in the early concept stages to let clients and management get a better understanding of their unboxing experience before going into production. I've had over 200 packages go to market, and I've worked on such brands as Star Wars, Transformers, Robotics, and Juul. That's just a few. My work has been on the Die Line. It's a packaging website, and it's also been on the KeyShot Instagram page. A lot of the stuff I'm going to walk you through today are personal projects. I'd say about half my time that I do rendering, I do for personal projects. I use those personal projects just to dig deeper into like rendering and model making, because those projects I feel like I don't feel bad spending an exorbitant amount of time on. This was a render I did for GoPro. I was working on the GoPro cameras and I did these packages. This was Hero 3 through Hero 6. Before I start a concept, I'm just going to kind of like break down my design process through this presentation. I'll go through some of the materials also as we go. Before I start a concept, I usually try to research and sketch out to make sure everything makes sense. I do this because it'll save me some time in the CAD process. That way I limit the amount of changes I have in the CAD process. I want to try to catch all those mistakes early. That way I know exactly what I need to build. I'll apply like rough materials in this process just to get a better idea of what's working. And then in KeyShot, I'll refine those materials and often switch them out. This is also a good opportunity. I use this to think about the manufacturing process of how I'm actually going to make this package. And then also thinking about the consumer's unboxing experience. Then I'll also at the beginning stages like to create like a Pinterest board of just, it's usually materials and then maybe some features of the package I like. And then also a lot of rendering shots, like photography shots. So that way I kind of figure out what kind of lighting I think would work for this package, what kind of layouts. And I'll try to do that as early as possible just so I'm thinking about it while I'm building. These sketches are for a project I did called Unboxing the Ballots, where I looked at how to change up the at-home ballot process that we had this year, or that most people use this year, to make it more of a premium experience and just think differently. And this were the early sketches I did for that. As far as programs go, I kind of a wide variety. Artioscad is a big one. That's a packaging-based program. I use this to create die lines, specifically like inserts or boxes. Really anything that's paper and folds, I'll make in Artios. Artios lets me fold everything or create everything in 2D, and then I can fold it up in 3D and export that file, which is really nice. And then also I can also take that file and cut samples with it if I had to. SolidWorks is another program I use. I use this for anything that's really formed. So we figure thermoforms, molded fiber trays, foam, rigid boxes, and then I'll also make assemblies in SolidWorks. Marvelous Designer is a newer program I've been starting to use. I use this for organic shapes, really, like bigger bags, stuff that's hard to make in SolidWorks, bags, fabric, that sort of stuff. Cinema 4D, I've just started like the last month or two using that. So far, it's a really nice program. I think it's pretty powerful. Lets you do a lot of simulation stuff, which saves you a lot of time in modeling and trying to make stuff look natural. Photoshop, I use this for all my post-processing. And I also use Photoshop to do all my depth of field. And then Illustrator, I'll use that to create illustrations for the packages. Also like any labels. And then Affinity Designer, I usually use that just to create some orthographic sketches off the start. I can usually knock those out pretty fast. And I feel like Affinity has a good UI. It's kind of similar to SolidWorks and Artioscad, so it's easy to pick up. Before I take my files into KeyShot, I usually create an assembly within SolidWorks. And that has all the different possible box configurations, such as I'll make like an open box configuration, a closed box, a flat box, partial box, whatever it is, whatever shots I know I'm going to need, I'll fold all those up in Artios and export each different one. But once you take your Artios file into KeyShot, it usually comes in as a bunch of little faces, so I'm unable to fold those hinges. So I'll just try to think out all my shots ahead of time, and I'll build up a big assembly in SolidWorks with all those different views. Also, when you fold up your boxes in Artios, I know a lot of people do it, but don't fold your box to 90 degrees. I'll fold some of the flaps will fold to 90 degrees, but a lot of like the lids, I'll fold to 91 degrees or 89 degrees, so it doesn't look fake. It doesn't look absolutely perfect. I feel like a perfect package looks fake, where if you can add just enough imperfections, it'll look real, but you don't want it to look damaged. So you're kind of just walking that line in between those two. And then also, I used to do it in SolidWorks. I used to separate my materials in SolidWorks, like the flute edging or the inside the panel, inside the part. Now I do all that in KeyShot. I do with that split edges or split face tool. And then also after I build all my CAD, I'll take it in KeyShot and I'll just apply rough materials. And I'll just do a quick render, usually like a top view, side view, and I'll start sketching over the top of that. I find this easier to do than trying to draw on a die line. The die line, sometimes it's hard to see like how a package is actually going to look. So I'll use this so I can like look at the graphics in 3D. And this way I can knock out a ton of different variations pretty quickly. And then I'll take whichever graphics I like, I'll make them look nicer, and then I'll bring them back into KeyShot and I'll render them. I'm going to start to break down some of the materials now. A huge one you see in packaging all the time is corrugate. For this, I'll usually start with the Polygon. They have a Polygon corrugate material. I'll use one of those. And then I'll also edit the geometry. So that way, like I said, I'll make all those flutes around the edges. And I'll add those in. And then also, a lot of times, I feel like the materials I see for corrugate are often like way too bright and way too nice looking sometimes. So I'll go into KeyShot and I'll use the color adjust, and I'll just usually turn the saturation down just slightly. I feel that looks a little bit more realistic. Sometimes they're just too bright. A lot of the corrugates I see, they don't look as like faded or sun-worn as like you usually see a corrugate package. This is just a little basic shipper box I did. Some of the things to think about when you do even just like a simple box like this is I'll use that KeyShot has a radius tool on your geometry on the toolbar, and add just a little bit of radius to your boxes, especially if you have like a perf like this one does, and it will accentuate your perfs, especially coming out of Artios. Sometimes I'll even go back in and I'll go into Photoshop and I'll draw it in over the top of it just to make those perfs more distinct. When I place shipping labels like this, I place the graphics I usually put on perfectly, but the shipping labels or any sort of that sort of stuff, I'll usually put, like I said, slightly askew, so that way it doesn't look like a machine did it. So that way it feels like this package feels like it's homemade, or a small company. So that way it's just placed slightly askew, just to like mimic what it's gonna be like in real life. For the flute edges, I kind of use a material like this. It's just really a stack of corrugate that's all there, and then I just drop it on, and then I'll usually turn the brightness down. And it kind of usually works out well because I'm usually not zooming in on the corrugate, on the flute edge, and I feel like people don't really even notice it as long as it's there. And then I've also heard that I haven't looked into it, I'm going to look into it this week, that Artios lets you export your flute edges, but this is still something I'm going to explore this week. But yeah, this is how I do it. Bring your Artios files in, and there's this split object surfaces. So just go along everywhere you see this flute edge, and then I just apply material. So there's an image really just like this, and I'll drop it right on those flutes. Another thing to think about, especially when you're using craft material, is craft material often bleeds through on your graphics. So if you were to put like a white graphic like I have here, I'll go in and I'll go to my color composite and I'll turn the alpha down just slightly. So that way my image is, or my graphic that I add is slightly, has a slight opacity to it. That way that craft material bleeds through. The only way you can really do that in real life is to avoid that is you would have to print down a layer of white and then print on top of it. But I feel like most craft packages I see don't do that. So it's just something to think about, make it look more realistic. Now I'm going to look at, this is how I do my foils and plastic materials. For plastic, I'll start out with the KeyShot plastic transparent, and then I'll add just a really small amount of roughness. And then I'll also add like a barely there layer of dust. For dust, I try to make it barely visible. I feel like if you can see it, that's probably too much, especially, I don't want my packages to look dusty. I just don't want it to look pristine. And then the other thing to think about is when you're vacuum forming, which is like this thermoform we see here, your radius isn't always going to be as tight as your CAD model. Like your edges on your thermoform would be a perfect 90. And then even where that cavity meets part of the base of the thermoform, you would have a radius there, but then when you actually model it, it's going to be slightly bigger, just the way that material forms. It's not going to suck in as tight. So I'll use the KeyShot radius tool, and I'll just bump up my radiuses just slightly so it's a little more soft. And I feel like this helps soften up my edges, and the lighting's not as drastic. And then also you have perfs and stuff like that. It helps accentuate those perfs. And then this was a render I did when I was applying to work for Juul. Packaging is only 2 parts, so it's relatively simple. So it's really imperative that you kind of nail those 2 materials because it can't really hide behind much. And then when I do simple ones like this, I'll usually try to build out a little more scene where I'll bring in a couple extra elements just to add a little more drama to the package. Or this one I just added like this little piece of stone and then a fabric cloth underneath it. I feel it helps like pull the render together so you're not just slapping a thermoform on a white background. And then for the foil, I'll start out with a crumpled paper material that I got from Polygon, and I'll add that to a metal material and KeyShot. And then I also added a small dot pattern by using the KeyShot mesh texture. You don't want, for the wrinkles, I turn the wrinkles down on the bump map because I don't want the wrinkles to be the focal point of the package, but I just want them slightly visible. We'll move on. This one is, I'm going to go over molded fiber. Molded fiber is a sustainable packaging material that's become extremely popular. The paper pulp that is able to be formed in trays. The 2 main types of molded pulp are dry and wet press. The dry pulp is like a thicker, more robust material. We kind of think of like anything that's heavy, maybe like a car part or a grill or something like that. It usually comes in this thicker form trays. And then there's also wet press, which is shown here. It has a smoother finish. It's not as protective as dry press. And then you commonly see this on consumer electronics. You'll see it on phones or tablets. And then remember, when you build your molded fibers, you need to add a draft to it and make it look realistic, and then also radius all your edges. And let me go over this render real quick. For this render, I did it as like, this is another personal project. And I kind of use it as like a Merry Christmas image for my coworkers. The ornaments are from KeyShot Cloud. And then I added glitter by using the flake displacement tool in KeyShot. And then for the fabric, I used Marvelous Designer. I just draped the fabric over the molded fiber tray. And then for molded fiber, I found it's kind of weird, but it works well, is for wet press, molded fiber, I found that Polygon has a concrete 20 material. It looks really similar when you take out the fact that it's concrete, and then I'll just adjust the color, and you don't even notice that it's concrete. I'll change the color. Usually molded fiber usually come in black, white, for craft, but they can really come in any color, but those are like the three most commonly see. And then if I were to do dry press, I would use the same material, but then I'll just make it rougher. I'll turn the roughness up, and then I'll usually add like a mesh bump map to it. I'll just use that bump add tool, so that way I'd have the original concrete bump, and then I would have the mesh bump on top of that. And then when you're building, kind of similar to what I do for thermoformers, but you want to make sure you radius those edges, especially on that outside edge. You can see in the left image, I have the radius on the right image, I don't. It's subtle. I don't know if anyone else notices it, but I do. So I add that radius tool in KeyShot, which works well because then I can keep my original CAD file that we send to manufacturer, and I can keep that file how I want it. And then in KeyShot, I can just add that radius tool so it only affects a KeyShot file. That way, when the light hits it, it's not as drastic. And I think that little radius is going to be more realistic to what you're going to see after manufacturing and after it gets cut. Start talking about bags now. So bags were like one of the hardest things for me to build over the years. I used to try doing with SolidWorks, and it was almost impossible. I felt like trying to build a bag. I'd spend way too much time on it. So I started using Marvelous Designer. Marvelous Designer is a clothing design program, but it does a really good job of doing fabrics and soft goods like bags. In Marvelous Designer, I'll try to get the big wrinkles figured out, but then in KeyShot, I'll add in a displacement map or a bump map just to get those little wrinkles. And then this one, I just added a couple extra pieces. These little beads are from KeyShot Cloud. They were from I think it was the knife. I just pulled them off the knife and I just kind of scattered them all around. When doing a bag, I'll import the product being packaged into Marvelous Designer and then start building around it. I didn't realize this when I first started doing this. I just thought I could just build a bag and then inflate it, which you can do that, but it just doesn't look right. So you put that product inside and then you kind of drape over it and it will get the contours to your product better. And similar to Artios, Marvelous lets me build my die lines in 2D. And then I can add stitching. You can kind of see like these magenta lines, that's for stitching, which is essentially the same thing as a heat seal you would see on a bag. And then within Marvelous Designer, I'm able to simulate either that plastic or that cloth draping over the product. And then I'll export those files into KeyShot. Bridge boxes, I do these a ton. Bridge boxes are extremely common, especially in the consumer electronics industry. They are sustainable and they give a premium feel to your package. Rigid boxes are usually made up of like a chipboard skeleton that is wrapped with paper. The chipboard gives you like that rigidity that you feel, and then the paper wrap gives you the premium printing. Rigid boxes also give you some other options such as embossing and magnetic closures. And then this was for that project I did unboxing the ballots. This whole package is really about unboxing the documents. You're unboxing your at-home ballots. So it's really important to try to nail your documents. It seems like trivial. Like when I first started out, I used to just put in a piece of paper and that's it. But now I'll put in a piece of paper. I'll make sure I add graphics. Try to get graphics that look somewhat similar to what it should be. And then sometimes also on that piece of paper, I'll add a little bit of a displacement map, very small, just to give that paper so it doesn't look as flat. You can kind of see in the corners where the corners are either a little raised or a little dropped, and just add a little ripple to your package. And then also because of the simplicity of rigid boxes, all it really is a bunch of rectangles. It's really important that you nail the details to make everything look realistic. And packaging, a lot of times you're only using a handful of materials. So if you have like one material that's off, it's evident because it's all over your render. So you have to make sure like those materials are really dialed in. And for this one, I have a fabric liner that goes on the inside, and then pretty much the rest of the package is all the same material, and then I have the paper. So it's really only 3 basic materials on this one. These are some things to think about when you're building your rigid box. Make sure you radius your edges in KeyShot, or you can do it in whatever program you're doing. You can kind of see it on this render, how the shoulder on the package has a little radius, because when you wrap over on a rigid box, even when you're wrapping over a chipboard, it's going to be tight, but it's not going to be a perfect 90. So it's going to be slightly soft on the corners. And then when you wrap over the chipboard, you're going to have seams in the corners, so you can kind of see them. They're real light in all 4 corners, and even on the edges down here, you'll have a seam. So usually I'll just go in and Photoshop afterwards, and I'll draw those seams in. Same thing with like the inside of this lid. I kind of emphasize those seams before the material meets. And then also think about like the interior lid on the rigid box is often unwrapped, or it's a different color, kind of how my previous image was, or there's a molded fiber there, or some sort of protection, just to think about that when you're opening up your box. And then when I do my rigid box graphics, a lot of times I'll place the whole graphic just as one sheet, and that'll give me like a base, and then I'll separate that graphic into different elements based on, but sometimes on a rigid box you'll have one spot's foil, one spot's UV, one spot's embossed. So I use that first image just as like a map, and then after that I'll kind of separate each of those parts and replace them back on, so that way I have control over each element. So that way you can have different elements in the same package. And then, like I said, don't forget your documentation, even though it's kind of trivial, but it's just kind of filler, and it makes your package look whole. You'll see them everywhere, like your quick start guides or your warnings. That stuff helps and just adds an extra level of realism. Then we got to think about printing. There's a lot of printing options when it comes to packaging, especially compared to like a newspaper or magazine. Like the packaging printing options are tons. Like I said, I separate my labels out by like material finish. That way you can have each one be customized in KeyShot. For the UV materials, I'll use like a high gloss material, and then I'll add a bump map just to raise it slightly off the surface like you'd see in the real world. If it's flat against the surface, it doesn't really look realistic. If you look at like anything that relates to UV coating, it's usually raised. It's minuscule, but it's raised slightly. And then I'll kind of do similar thing for UV coating, or for foil, or metal texture, or holographic texture. And then when you're doing printing, I found that your lighting is half the battle. Because even if you add the UV coating and you add like a texture, if you don't have the right lighting, it still all looks the same. So a lot of times I'll try to emphasize the light. I'll use the lighting and the camera angle to emphasize that. And I also use the color adjust composite nodes frequently to try to minimize the amount of Photoshop on me. Like for this one, the American flag I brought in was in full color, and then once I put it in, I realized, like, oh, it doesn't look right, so I used the color adjust and I just desaturated it. So that way, it's one less step. I don't have to go back to Photoshop. I can just do everything in KeyShot as much as possible to try to cut the back and forth out. And then on this one, I kind of emphasized the lighting and the camera angle just so you can see the texture popping off the business card of the UV coating. Another thing to think about when you do packaging is you have a lot of options for it, especially the luxury packaging and the consumer electronics industry. There's the use of hot stamping, which is embossing. Hot stamping and embossing, which is common. Hot stamping gives you the ability to apply a metallic or holographic gloss or matte finish to an area of a package. the unboxing experience doesn't really start until you get home. So that initial graphic is kind of what's going to catch the customer's eye on the shelf. And then you can use that debossing or metallic material. That's what grabs the customer's attention. Once they kind of touch the package, you got a better chance of selling the package. And then this was a render I did for that same project of unboxing the ballot. For a foil hot stamp, I'll start with a metallic material or a metallic paint, and then I'll apply a label as a bump map and as an opacity map. That bump map will just help raise it or drop it, because usually when you see that foil stamping, it's usually one of the two. It's either debossed or embossed. You could use a displacement map, but I feel it's kind of overkill a lot of times. And this is, like you can see in this tree, I broke out. It looks big, but it's just because I have all these different labels broken out, so different materials are applied to them. And embossing, this is another thing to add to your packaging. Embossing your package creates a more tactile experience. It lets the end user know that this was designed and it wasn't just graphics slapped on it and shipped. There's a notable package. The iPhone 6, I always remember it, is just because they did an almost all white rigid box, and all they did was emboss the iPhone on the top. So that way you knew what it was, but it was very subtle. And then this was kind of what I did for the unboxing the ballot project also. This was a envelope that would hold up all your voter information, your ballot that the customer or the U.S. citizen would get. So I just used the bump tool. I just added the crest to the top of it. For layout, people see packaging every day, so when something looks out of place, they're quick to notice it. So I'll try to lay out these shots in an organic way so it feels natural of how you would see it on someone's desk or in someone's office. Sometimes we can do more of a pattern, but it's usually based off of like the client's aesthetic. Sometimes it makes more sense to pattern it and real rigid, but I think the majority of my stuff's more organic looking. And then also I like to do all my depth of field in Photoshop just for a couple of reasons. On this one, I did the original one, everything was in focus. So that way when I'm going into Photoshop and editing colors, or if I have to swap out labels on a package, I can do that in Photoshop. And then I just apply that depth of field at the end, where if you're trying to apply a graphic and then try to match the depth of field, it's a little trickier. And then I might reuse this render for something else. And that way I can change the focus. If we were talking about Hero 6 on one day, or we're talking about Hero 5, I can just go into Photoshop and reapply that lens blur. So that way Hero 5 is now in focus instead of Hero 6. And then you can do that depth of field. It's really simple. I don't know, a lot of people, I know Espan did a YouTube tutorial a while ago about it, and it was really good. To just take that depth pass, and then you bring it into your channels layer, and that's use the lens blur tool in Photoshop, and it works really well, I think. And then for my renders, especially when I'm doing like a presentation, I try to make sure that each image has a purpose. Like, what are you trying to show? Sometimes I'm trying to emphasize the material. And then other times I might be trying to emphasize manufacturing process, or an unboxing step, or an on-shelf presence, or even a lot of times it's just I'll emphasize potential issues in manufacturing or potential issues with the customer. So that way the client sees it ahead of time. We're kind of nipping it in the butt so we can kind of figure out if we want to move forward with it or not. And then also when I lay out these renders, I try to use, whenever possible, use the rule of thirds. where KeyShot has that drop down in the grids, and you can pick thirds. So try to drop your objects, or at least I start there on the thirds, so that way it gives you like a quick layout, and then you kind of adjust from there, and usually gives you something decent to work with, start out with. And then for this one, I tried to emphasize the fabric in the corporate logo, where I put the corporate logo into the stitching, and I used the added stitch tool within KeyShot just to add in their logo. I'll do this a lot where I'll hide in almost like Easter eggs throughout my packaging, just for myself, and then once in a while other people will notice it. It kind of keeps them interesting, brings me some enjoyment. And then as a package designer / engineer, I also have a couple slides just explaining the manufacturing process. It is helpful to show the client or supplier how I envision the package being assembled. It will help in determining an accurate cost. I find these sort of renders extremely helpful when presenting to like non-engineers, or sales reps, marketing teams. It's a lot easier to understand a render than it is an CAD assembly drawing or a flat drawing of a die line. So for this one is my unboxing the ballot project. This one, the whole concept was I wanted people to know the importance of their vote and to take it seriously. So I wanted the package to feel heavy, so that way they feel the weight of their decision that they're making. So in order to do this, I added extra layers of chipboard that I go inside the box. That way, I feel like most people, you pick up a rigid box, you have an idea of how much it's going to weigh, where this way it would feel uncomfortably heavy. So like a noticeable heaviness to the package, and it would also provide like extra rigidity that I felt your ballot deserves, and like a decision like that, the importance it deserves. KeyShot 10 also added this awesome feature, which is the settle feature, which I found to be extremely useful, especially when unboxing a package. This tool lets me lay out objects quickly and have them interact with each other to create a little drama in the image. So like for this one, I have all these shower curtain rings. Or for me to drop them all down on the left-hand side by hand, I probably wouldn't have done it. I probably would just drop two. Or that's why I took all of them and I just moved them over and I dropped them all, and it looks nice now. I think it adds a little more interest to your images. Another tool I often use, especially in the unboxing renderings, is I'll use the model sets where I'll bring in that huge assembly at the start, add all my materials to that, and then from there, I'll start breaking that apart using the model set. So that way I can go back and I can show different states of the package. And all I have to do is just click on model sets instead of trying to turn on and off models. And finally, I've learned over the years, you just have to do kind of what inspires you. And I found that you can never learn enough on the job. It's always hard to especially for rendering. I was always splitting my time between rendering and engineering. So I found that if I wanted to get good at it, I just needed to do it on my own a lot. So I do about half my rendering at work and then half of it on my own. And I always have a personal project running in the background just so I can spend way too much time on it and kind of learn some new features. For this one was a fishing reel I did. And this, I never really used metal very much in packaging or cork. And then I did the little fly out of the fabric tool. But this kind of lets me explore different materials that I typically wouldn't use. And then I'm able to bring what I learned there back to my work packaging. So it kind of brings it full circle. And you learn a lot more sometimes when you don't have a deadline. So you can kind of just go down a rabbit hole and spend a ton of time on this stuff. And these are some other renders where I usually, outside of work, I'll try to do stuff that's not packaging, just to change it up a little bit. And then you also learn different materials, different lighting, different techniques. And that's it. Thank you. Is there any questions?
You had a ton of questions, actually. That was fantastic. I think, first of all, everyone in the Q&A and myself agree that you should be put in charge of making the ballots going forward.
Thank you.
I think people will be much more excited to get yours in the mail. That was really great. I really love too how you talked about, which seems to be a really recurring theme from folks, is one of the best things to do to really unlock your kind of KeyShot knowledge is to kind of build your own personal projects, right? Kind of give yourself these mini projects, if you will, to really let you kind of explore without kind of feeling the sort of pressure of a client deadline, but still kind of having the learnings. One question I had, I noticed on you were talking about Marvelous Designer. Have you used the real cloth feature at all in KeyShot?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
I have it in here.
Yeah, because I was curious just because it seemed like the one example with that one there would be perfect for real cloth, especially to kind of do that little custom weave in there. I did also.
Yep, that's where I did the custom weave in KeyShot.
Oh, great. Okay.
So all that was, I don't think I have the gray in here. All it was just a fabric drop, and then I did that custom weave was in KeyShot using the edit weave tool. Or I think it's edit weave tool.
That's great. And people were also asking about the settle tool and kind of how and that's a really that's a new feature that was added in 10.1 and essentially what that allows you to do in the example he shows here is basically instead of having to place all those, you can just take your objects and just drop them in there and it'll automatically just sort of settle with gravity onto the floor. So that's actually a really neat way to kind of use that feature.
And then for those, like this one, I literally took all the rings on the right and I picked them up and I moved them over. But then just make sure you I turn them so they're vertical. So that way, if you were to drop them just flat, I don't think they would interact with each other, or turn them so they're all on the y-axis and then they'll drop so that way they all bump and collide and get that randomness effect. Great.
And I did enjoy the Del Griffith shout out there for the shower ring salesman of the world.
You like that? I'm glad someone got it.
So I'm going to jump into some packaging specific questions, and this is a little bit out of my domain expertise. So hopefully I'll get all these questions for you right. I think you may have answered this one, but someone was asking how you got the flutes to show when routing files from Artioscad through SolidWorks into KeyShot.
Trying to cheat. Let me show you. I've heard there's a way. I've never done it. I've heard there's a way though you can bring flutes from Artios to KeyShot.
Okay.
I've never done it. What I use is this image here on the left hand side. Is I use that literally as a material, and then I'll separate my surfaces. Like you can see this edge that's highlighted here on the right side. So that comes into KeyShot as one part, and I'll use that to split wherever there would be fluting, and then I'll apply this image to that edge.
Ah, okay, that's clever.
And it's usually so small. Like if you were to zoom in on it, it's going to be wrong. But from a distance,
okay.
Oh, but then there's this one. This one actually, I geeked out and I just modeled the flutes.
Okay. All right, but you think there is potential way to do that, but we're not clear what it is. Okay. And then someone was asking, do you use the sheet metal tool in SolidWorks to create or fold your box, or have you done that?
I have, but it's been years. I just, luckily my employers usually have Artioscad.
Okay.
It kind of makes life easy when you have Artioscad compared to doing it in sheet metal and SolidWorks.
Okay. Someone's asking, can you share any details about the 3D modeling used to make the vacuum form structure? I guess that plastic blister case in the Juul example. Did you receive that from them, or is that something that you had to model? Can you tell us a bit about how that got developed?
But this one is just what I was applying to Juul, so I wanted to have something in my portfolio that I could show them, like, I can do this for you guys. So I literally just bought a sample, a Juul package, and I just rebuilt it. I went into SolidWorks with a caliper and measured out everything and just redrew the whole thing in SolidWorks.
Okay, great. And then it sounds like you're using a lot of the KeyShot Cloud. Is that accurate? That you use that to grab a lot of kind of scene dressing files now?
Yeah, exactly. I'll use it for kind of filler. If
Okay.
I just need something to drop in the background, to kind of like this one, I use the ornaments, and then I think on another one, there it goes. Yeah, I'll just sometimes if it makes sense, I'll throw it in the background on an image.
Okay. And one person was asking the difference between doing the fillet edges in CAD versus doing the radius tool in KeyShot, and kind of why you use one versus the other.
You can do the fillet tool in CAD. The only reason I don't do that a lot of times is because I'll use that same CAD and I'll send it to manufacturing, and I don't want that fillet on our tool. So that way, I can keep that original CAD file legit as like how I want it for tooling, and then I can have applied the radius only in KeyShot. If that makes sense. So that way, those two files, I'm not running two separate CAD files.
Great. Okay. And then someone else is asking on the rigid boxes, is the wrap applied to the box in KeyShot as a label, or is it modeled on there? I'm not sure exactly which example he was referring to on that one.
Like all these, I don't model the wrap. I just apply it as a label, unless I have done it in the past where I'm going to show. Sorry, the computer's going slow. Let's see if I'm going to show something like the inside where I need to show that the wrap is going to only go halfway down. Which sometimes happens. Sometimes the package, when it wraps over, they won't wrap it to the bottom. They'll wrap it an inch from the top or something like that. And then I'll either use the split face in KeyShot or the split face tool in SolidWorks. And I'll just split up that edge. So that way I can have two different materials.
Okay, great. On the seal for the white envelope, I think that was maybe on the, I don't know if it meant on the fabric.
On the ballot.
Yeah. Did you tweak that in Photoshop to get it to show so well, such as using an AO layer? How did you kind of get that to pop, basically?
I'm going to have to get back. I can't remember. I know I used the bump map in KeyShot, but I can't remember if I emphasized it afterwards in Photoshop.
Okay.
I'm almost going to say this is just a bump map from added to a KeyShot file, but I can double check for you afterwards.
Okay. Someone else was asking on kind of the last one where you're sort of showing some of your personal projects on the helmet shot, kind of how you did some of the lighting on some of those. If that was all kind of custom lighting, or if that was, just sort of environments inside a KeyShot.
That one, I'm pretty sure I just used. What I usually use, I feel like one of the HDRIs where it's like an interior environment. And I don't think I used it on this one though. I think this one might have been on the other shot that I usually use that. But this one, I think I just made a custom one and it was all black. And then I just started using like pin lights where you can adjust it in KeyShot. And then I just started playing around with colors. I knew the color, the helmet was going to be black and purple. So I just started putting that light where you can drag the pin. I put one there and then move another one and see what that does.
Okay.
A lot of trial and error.
And then in terms of kind of your overall sort of experience, some people are asking, when you start a project, how do you kind of estimate how long it's going to take? I mean, is it just sort of just from years of experience, or, how do you kind of estimate the complexity of some of these projects?
For personal projects, I don't really estimate. That is just whenever it's done, it's done. But for like work projects, I can usually tell just by like what sort of structure they want, or I know how many parts we're actually building. Where if it's a thermoform on a blister card, it's only 2 parts. Where if it's a package like unboxing the bell, where it might be 7 or 8 different parts, it's a little more labor intensive. It's kind of off the start. And you can kind of tell too on the product. If the product's expensive, a lot of times it's just more time consuming because you have to make a finer package, so you have more going into it, and your tolerances have to be tighter, and the way stuff works together has to be more pristine. Where if you're just doing an action figure on a blister card, it's just a thermoform on a card. It's not as bad.
Okay.
And it's just more years of experience. You kind of get an estimate on timing.
And then along those lines, I mean, where do you look for kind of inspiration when you're working with these projects, either personal or for work? How do you kind of get inspired by some of the concepts and ideas that you bring into the brand and into the imagery?
Pinterest, I think, does a really good job of. I use that a ton just to like build mood boards. I can find different packaging that I think looks good, or not even a lot of times on the packaging, it's like products or photography. Instagram, I think, does a pretty good job too, where you kind of get exposed to a lot more. I follow a ton of artists on Instagram, so I kind of get exposed to a lot of artists, and I'll see what they're working on and be like, wow, that's really cool. Like, how could I use that in my stuff? You kind of see different techniques that I know Liam, I can't remember his last name now, but he did a clay tutorial for KeyShot, and he used a displacement map to kind of just disform the clay so it looked a little oblong almost and more realistic. And then I do the same thing. I didn't do it on these ones, but once in a while I'll do it on a rigid box where I'll use that same technique just to make it so it's not as square. But you just use a super small displacement map. And then, yeah, I think Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube is really good, especially for tutorials. You kind of find everything.
Okay, great. And then one last question before we kind of wrap up here. In terms of color consistency and making sure that you're getting, consistency between what you're showing on the screen and the visualization versus, what's actually getting printed, how do you manage that process?
That's tricky. I get it as close as I can on the render, and then I have to go back into Photoshop usually and tweak it. So what I'll do is I'll just bring the swatch over, because I feel like you apply the lights, and the lights just affect that color so much. So I'll bring that swatch into Photoshop, and I'll put it like right on top of the box, and then I'll just adjust the box colors in Photoshop. That's why when I was talking about the depth of field, I think it's super nice doing that in Photoshop, just so that way you have that clean selection, and I can drop like a gray swatch over Hero 5, and I can match it up right to what we plan on producing in production.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you again for the presentation. I'm going to take the screen back here, and then just kind of let people know what's coming up here for the rest of our program. So a big thank you to Matt Hanzly at Bucktail Design, and you had your contact information there. People have additional questions for you at 2 p.m. today. So in about an hour, we'll have From Physical to Digital with KeyShot, Frank Teneski from Kids 2. So he'll be talking about how he uses KeyShot to replace photography. And then one more day tomorrow. We're coming back with 3 more great sessions tomorrow, 10, noon, and 2 p.m. So please join us back there again. Thank you again to Matt for coming today. Matt, any parting thoughts for us here?
No, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, guys. And yeah, thank you. Have a good day.
Wonderful. Well, we certainly learned a lot today, and thank you all, and we'll see you all in about an hour, and thank you for attending.